Good morning and welcome to the International Connection. We are continuing with our radio series on mind control. This is week number 7 in the series. And we've heard so far a lecture by Dr. Colin Ross about the documented history of creating multiple personalities in people to be used as Manchurian candidates or programmed agents. Colin Ross talked about the documented evidence of LSD experiments with children, where they were kept on strong daily doses of LSD for up to months at a time. And also the use of brain implant experiments on children by George Esterbrooks, who is another Canadian doctor that was involved in U.S. national security mind control experiments. We heard last week the testimony of mind control and radiation experiments conducted on children that was introduced at the presidential hearings on radiation experiments in 1995. President Clinton has since publicly apologized and compensated some of the victims of the radiation experiments. Survivors of mind control are now calling for hearings on the mind control experiments in particular. Today, we are airing the story of Ronald Howard Cohen, who was abducted and severely drugged by CIA and military in the late 60s. Ronald Cohen was an activist in the early 60s in the United States, and he is a writer. He has subsequently written a book about his experiences, only to have the book stolen, transcripts of the book stolen, and he was told he was not publishing a book by the CIA and the FBI. You're listening to CKLN 88.1. Here is the story of Ronald Howard Cohen.
Transgressions by Ronald Howard Cohen. Prologue. Step 1. The Patricians. We need to surprise human guinea pigs. Volunteers won't do. We need to take people by surprise. It's as simple as that. The speaker stopped, looked at the man he was talking to, and took a deep breath. It's field research, he went on. That's all, just field research. You mean United States citizens, not Orientals or Europeans? Yes, don't look at me like that. Better us do it to them than someone else. Don't bring up the menace to me. I'm not big on that. United States citizens, that's what we're talking about here, right? Yes. What's wrong with you? I said, yes. God, man, you've put screws into wood. You know it takes some effort. Both of us have been in the world long enough to know that everything has a risk element to it. Field research, that's all. Some things aren't pretty. You know that. Don't make me out like I'm a bad guy. I'm responding to a need, that's all. Anyway, it's not something I brought you in here to debate. It's been cleared from above. Your job is simply to get to work on it.
I'm here speaking with Ronald Howard Cohen, a writer and victim and survivor of abduction and drugging experiments by the U.S. government. And welcome to the show, Ron.
Oh, good morning, Wayne. It's a pleasure being here, and I really want to sincerely thank you for having the courage to have me on, since it's proved to be a very difficult task to find somebody with any courage at all who has access to the public media.
I'd like to thank you for coming on as well. It's a courageous act in talking about this, and I'm, as you're well aware, and probably a lot of the listeners know, that there's many forces out there that don't want this information to get out into the public, and so I appreciate you telling your story.
Okay, I guess it's possible that I should start with a little brief introduction about who I am. I'm a 53-year-old writer who was born in the Bronx, New York, about 6 blocks from Yankee Stadium. I was raised with the idea that I might become the first Jewish president of the United States, and I used to think that the founding fathers were great human beings. And then in the 1960s, I became very active. I've always been a writer. I've been a writer since I was 14. I've always considered it part of my calling. And in the 1960s, I became very active in the civil rights movement and in the peace movement. Worked with SNCC and CORE and the War Resisters League. and I spent 12 years living in the Village and the Lower East Side in New York. I was a very hip dude. And I was an original flower child in Haight-Ashbury in 1967. I was one of the original coterie of the people who got that all off the ground. And in so doing so, I became part of, apparently, I became part of Mr. Nixon 20,000 or so shit list, and became tagged. I'm assuming from the research that I've done that this was as per the Houston Project, which was something, a coordination of the CIA and the FBI and U.S. Army intelligence to get all those radicals, because Kissinger was convinced and telling Nixon, like, you know, we've got 1915 out there, for God's sakes, Richard, you know, and we've got to do something about it. So
did you have any indication that you were being monitored or targeted at that point?
Oh, well, you see, that's very interesting, because I was sincerely a member of the counterculture. And in sincerely being a member of the counterculture, like what our reason d'etre was to change the world, you know. And so we used to like kid around, like, and sort of like, you know, to prove your mettle would be, you know, how many undercover narcs did you turn, you know, and get them to quit the force and become hippies, or you know, how many undercover guys did you get to actually, you know, have a drink with you, or even smoke some dope and say, like, you know, start telling you about, yeah, well, you know, it's not a great job and blah blah blah, you know. So it was sort of like, you know, confrontation was like part of the game, you know. I mean, like, I hitchhiked over 100,000 miles. I don't know, it may have been 150,000 miles all over the United States. I started out as a careerist. I mean, I started out working in newspapers in New York. I received the quickest promotion, one of the quickest promotions, may have been the quickest promotion in the New York Mirror's history, from copy boy to assistant editor. And then I worked on trade journals in New York, and I was a careerist. And then the Vietnam War was happening, and the civil rights movement, and then all of that took place. But so, what's your question? I've lost the thread of what you were.
Whether you had any indication of being monitored,
but it wasn't a thing that was a big deal. It was sort of like, well, obviously, if we are the best minds of our generation, and we refuse to be defeated, okay, well, you're challenging the dragon. The dragon's going to breathe fire at you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, so obviously, sure. Right. That didn't bug me.
Yeah, it's so after maybe we could talk about what you were doing at the time of the abduction, and to talk about the abduction itself.
Oh, let me just give a little bit of background about what MKUltra was, which is not the easiest thing in the world to do, because Mr. Helms, who was the head of the CIA, and Sidney Gottlieb, who was the CIA director of the project, their liaison with the Department of Defense, supposedly either shredded or burned all of the files on this. Now, John Marks, who wrote a book about called The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, after they claimed to have burnt all the files on MKUltra, he came across some documents, and I've read other things that people say, other researchers, they say, like, oh man, they didn't burn the documents as cover story, you know. But I mean, like, if you know, it's very deep. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So, but what MKUltra was a major project. The sincerity of the reason that, as far as I can make out, is that if you are doing noble work as being a warrior class, and you are a spy for the warrior class, then one of the things that you have to cover is, like, well, what happens if they capture one of us? What are they going to do to us? Okay. Well, I don't know. They might give us all sorts of drugs. And they might torture us, but we've been through that. Or they might use more sophisticated things with rays and with God knows what else. Maybe they'd even use like just thoughts. I mean, like you can just go off into all sorts of trips. Okay, so there was 6 major divisions, and what happened
of
with
the MKUltra
of the MK, as far as I understand, and what happened with the project that I think I was tagged under, which, if I'm correct, was subproject 255. Okay, and this, by the way, which came out during the Carter administration, the Senate hearings that they had with Senator Kennedy and Senator Church, was stuff where they basically had worked with U.S. Army people. The BBC did a wonderful documentary on some of the stuff, giving LSD and then running U.S. Army people through calisthenics. I mean, like they ruined people's minds. I mean, and then they did, black prisoners. I mean, because the United States is a racist, class conscious society. They had given drugs to black prisoners or people in mental institutions. I mean, they were discountable. I mean, so what? Okay, but yeah, from what from the documentation I read and the testimony that was given in front of the Senate committees in 1970s, that went on. But then the big issue, as far as I understand, was like, okay, we got this data. Okay. Now, one of the interesting things also, they have many different types of drugs. Okay, and because I became very well acquainted, I was part of the drug culture. Okay, I became very well acquainted with what marijuana was. I became acquainted with what LSD was. Okay, what I was given was not LSD and it was not marijuana. It screwed up my mind for 5 years. Okay, and so they had lots of choices, but in just from what I understand, in dealing with this was in the late 60s, in dealing with the LSD, they had given it in laboratory settings to people, and everybody had a bad trip. I mean, they were just miserable, right? So then they decided to do field research with that, and then there's a lot of conjecture whether the whole hippie movement was a CIA-sponsored project, but that's more fantasy than reality to me. But anyway, they did. I mean, Lilly Corporation in Indianapolis, as far as I understand, bought a lot of their drugs for them. But as far as I understand, if you released more documents, people could be a little firmer on what their understandings are. As a matter of fact,
Sandoz as well. Manufacturing LSD for the CIA.
Right. The only thing that what they then decided was like, look, we've got to find people unsuspecting, okay? Because if given their reasoning, okay, that if they're looking to protect their agent, okay, they're not going to have a situation coming. Somebody's going to come up to them and say, "Excuse me, could I give you this dangerous drug?" Right? So they needed to just take somebody and just give them this drug. Okay, so the situation was politically, well, here's these hippies, and they're taking drugs. Okay. Well, they don't get along with their families, okay? And they're all traveling around hitchhiking. I mean, they're easy game, okay? So, we pick up a couple of hippies. What are they going to do? They're going to go to the police and say, I'm stoned? I mean, so that's, from what I understand, where I came into the picture. Now, where I came into the picture personally is I was hitchhiking. I lived, I was very counterculture. I'd given up my career, sold all my suits, and I was basically, in a different garb and hairstyle. And so I was living, and situating myself in different communities, which was like, the Lower East Side and Greenwich Village in New York, Berkeley and San Francisco and California, and other sections in L.A. or Taos, New Mexico, or Boulder, Colorado. There were Madison, Wisconsin. There were little pockets, okay. of sort of counterculture communities, okay? Because that was one of the central thrusts. I mean, like the 60s has gotten such a terrible bad rap. There were the basic good thing that I experienced, what the 60s was doing really had nothing to do with drugs. What it had to do with was, because that was a tool, and that's the way that I looked at it, was whether the dog wags the tail or the tail wags the dog. Okay, the thing that and I haven't touched drugs in 15 years. I mean, but the way that that we looked at things was that, look, there's no community. I mean, everything's screwed up. You know, why is everything screwed up? There's no sense of community, okay? And people function in a world that they don't like. Why don't they like it? Because it's competitive, okay? Well, let's try to have a cooperative community. Well, to the executive powers, that's communism. What are you talking about? Okay? So, you know, that's where the new left, you know, came in. Although I wasn't political any longer at that point. At that point, what I had decided was, like, I tried politics. I was getting arrested on demonstrations and all of that. It didn't matter, you know. I mean, some guy burnt himself to death in front of the Pentagon, and Nixon said he was watching football games, you know. I mean, so what mattered, it seemed to me, was a changing of personal self, okay, and changing about how you relate to the next person you meet. That's what mattered, okay. I mean, there's the same philosophy that Mother Teresa functioned on, although that's a whole other case. But anyway, okay, so I'm hitchhiking between these communities, and I used to hitchhike across the country. I mean, like, you know, I would do it in 5 or 6 days. It was just like, you know, like going around the corner for a container of milk to me, you know. Okay, so I'm hitchhiking through in Indianapolis, Indiana. Okay, the crossroad. I'm going from the West Coast to the East Coast. Okay, and so I'm hitchhiking through Indianapolis, Indiana. I get picked up by this gentleman who wants to discuss, you know, the Vietnam War, right? And immediately, I mean, all I wanted to do was get a ride. I mean, you know, you know. So I sort of debate. You know, it's sort of like, you know, if you know, a born again Christian picks you up and wants to discuss religion, you know, it's sort of like, okay, is this worth 300 miles? You know, or, you know, I mean, like, so, okay. Anyway, so the and excuse my cynicism. Remember, I'm from New York City. I've been here for 20 years. I try to modify it, but it slips back every once in a while. Anyway, so the thing was, this guy picked me up and he wants to discuss the Vietnam War. So finally, you know, I say, oh, the hell with this guy's a jerk. And so I start telling him my views about the Vietnam War, right? So immediately, he isn't going very far any longer, okay? I said, blew the ride. All right, so he lets me off, okay? So I hope I've established my sanity before we get into this, because this starts getting a little weird. And the thing when you start talking about stuff that's weird, you know, if somebody's listening to you who doesn't know you, it's sort of like, who's this weirdo talking about weirdness, you know? And like, you know, I am not weird. I mean, believe me, after 5 years of being nuts, you know, I know what weird is, okay? And like, I got my feet on the ground, okay? But what I start talking about here, if it sounds bonkers, it's bonkers. And it was U.S. government policy that was bonkers, okay? I mean, these projects, you know, started in 1947 as right. Artichoke and Bluebird, and then what became MKUltra, and it was supposed to have only gone on from 1953 to 1977, but that's open to conjecture whether it's not still going on. But anyway, or debate. Anyway, so I'm standing on the side of the road, okay, and this great car comes and picks me up, okay, and I got into the car and I knew how to read drivers. I'd done a lot of hitchhiking really well, okay. So this guy's in an iron starched, you know, white shirt, slacks, short haircut, nothing in the car. I mean, no bouncing doggy heads or dice or, you know, and no music going. I mean, like, so I said, like, I don't know, insurance salesman, right? You know, so I figured, like, okay, I got in the car, thanked them for giving me a ride, and immediately, you know, I wanted to know how far are you going, you know. Yeah, he's going, a while. So that meant to me, you know, well, if you're interesting and you're not threatening, you know, I mean, like, you know, you're stopping to pick somebody up, so you got to cool them out and tell them you're not threatening. So you talk sex or you talk football or whatever, you know, to just, or music or something. Okay. So I tried just chatting this guy up, right? Nothing. Straight out ahead, right? So immediately I go into my mind, I mean, I've been through all sorts of situations with I mean, people showing me their guns in cars and, you know, or people who pick you up and say, I'm going to rob the gas station up the road. And, oh, why don't you let me out before you do that? You know, and stuff like that, you know. So, you know, I immediately, since this guy, you know, he's not saying anything, I just thought, oh, is this one a weirdo? I mean, is this guy dangerous to me, right? All right. So I asked him, can I smoke? Which I smoked cigarettes at that time, okay? Marlboro cigarettes, all right? So he said yes. And the thing was, the car was immaculate. And in retrospect, I mean, it was a government issued car. I mean, that, you know, so I slipped down in the passenger seat, sort of like slouched down, you know, sort of relaxing and sort of like trying to, like, you know, assess the situation. Okay. Now it starts getting weird. Okay. Under the dashboard, okay, is a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Small one, right? I just went, oh. Running. I just went, oh, fuck. What is this? Okay, I mean, I'd seen a lot of stuff, but that one, I hadn't seen that one before, right? So, so I just sort of went, whoa, boy, you know, next coffee stop, I'm out of here, man. You know, so, I mean, I don't want to find out more literary content or not. This is enough. Okay, so I flip open, you know, the side ashtray on the door. Okay, the little ashtray. I flip it open. Okay. Now it gets movie time bizarre, okay? Because I can't explain really what happened. Obviously, I got hit somehow by a knockout drug. But what I thought happened next, and what I see in my mind's eye, okay? Because that's the last coherent observation I had for the next 5 years, okay? Dig that. What I see is a needle coming out of the ashtray. Now the mind is going, and the mind's going, that's crazy, man. Needles don't come out of ashtrays. I mean, okay? And I'm out. Okay. Okay. Now, the rest of this is like just scattershot. Okay. My head was picking up like sort of like, you know, screen goes black. Okay. And then it becomes light for a little bit, and it's a little bizarre, and then it goes black again. And my body, I'm weak like a kitten. I mean, I'm drugged. I'm zero. Okay, so I'm just raising consciousness when I come out of the black. Okay. But what I remember is it's now nighttime. It's raining, and then panic.
Still in the car.
Still in the car, although I look over the guy and I never got it clear. Again, this is really, you know, what it was sort of like, is that the same guy? You know, and so, but what's important and what really happened was like behind a total panic attack, okay? Because it was sort of like, oh fuck, what is going on? Okay. Out again, okay. Come to highway sign, okay. Virginia, Maryland, okay. I know I went to Maryland, okay? There's a place called Fort Detrick, Maryland, which is significant to the FBI, the CIA, and U.S. Army intelligence. Mucho, okay? I don't know if that's where I was taken. Okay. But I remember...
also the Edgewood Arsenal.
Yeah, right. I went out again, okay, and I came to. I'm starting to get tension in just remembering all this. Anyway, I came to, and I mean it's not a thing that leaves you, and I came to. And now it even gets like, Alfred Hitchcock movie-ish, okay? It's still raining at night, I mean, which is perfect scenario, right? But this is not fiction, kids. This is reality. I write fiction, but this stuff really happened, okay? No doubt, okay? So I come to, and there's an MP, okay, comes to the window.
An MP, an army...
Military police.
Okay.
Okay. Military police comes out of a little thing, comes to the thing. They go through some gyrations. We enter this place. I remember, I don't know why I was going in and out, to tell you the truth. And although I was barely coming out, okay. We then drive down into a basement driving thing, and the door swings open. Okay. Next thing, two guys are walking me up a back staircase, out again, sort of like a ward place. And the interesting that I've never been able to follow through in all of the research I've done years and years of research on this stuff, is like the feeling that I got, okay, was like, oh shit, there's other people here. Okay, and like, so the research that I've sort of tried to get is like, nursing staff, dietitians, I mean, whatever, or, okay, but, okay, out again. Now, the significant part of this, I don't know how long I was there. My feeling is it was a couple of days, at most a week. I mean, the reason is that, I mean, you got to understand at that particular time I wasn't following newspapers or calendars, and I didn't wear a watch, and et cetera, but it was summertime, okay, and it was still summertime, okay. So maybe it was a week, maybe it was a couple of weeks, okay. I mean, one of the other projects, by the way, was implants. They also were but I don't believe that was the thing that they did to me, okay, because I believe that I got hit with a drug. I was given a drug. Okay. I do not know, with all of the requests, I have files and files and pages of freedom of information requests, of letters to senators, of letters to congressmen, of letters to every significant journalist that you can think of, okay, to lawyers, to lawyer associations. I mean, believe me, when I thanked you for having courage, for having me on, that's heartfelt, okay? And so, I don't know what I was given, and I don't know how long I was there. Okay.
Like, did you just have a sense that other people were there, or did you actually meet eye
No. It was sort of like bunk beds, and people are sort of like stretched out, like sort of like, Wipeout City type of, recuperation ward, and I just got walked through there. Okay, but that's the only last. They must have hit me. So that I can only assume. Maybe somebody say, "Well, you didn't give them enough." Yeah, and then I was gone. Okay, so or they erased my memory. I don't know. Open-ended conjecture. I don't know what the hell went on there. I mean, it's more than a little bit of curiosity to me. But anyway, so I then start having some conscious memory of what happens next. Okay, which okay, I've been there obviously for some time, and I'm now in a cafeteria. Okay, it's an empty cafeteria. There's two guys, more in suits, government straight arrows in suits. They walk me down, it's like an open cafeteria. They walk me down, they're getting coffee, right? Then we walk back to a table, and I remember the guy was eating a muffin, and one of them shoved the muffin under my nose, and he said, "Here, you want a bite?" And the other guy said, "Hey, leave him alone. Yeah. And then I'm out again. I'm in a car, different car, sunny out, okay, highway, Pennsylvania.
We'll be back with the second half of this in the series of Mind Control on CKLN.
I then start having some conscious memory of what happens next. Okay, which okay, I've been there obviously for some time, and I'm now in a cafeteria. Okay, it's an empty cafeteria. There's two guys, more in suits, government straight arrows in suits. They walk me down, it's like an open cafeteria. They walk me down, they're getting coffee, right? Then we walk back to a table, and I remember the guy was eating a muffin, and one of them shoved the muffin under my nose, and he said, "Here, you want a bite?" And the other guy said, "Hey, leave him alone." Yeah. And then I'm out again. I'm in a car, different car, sunny out, okay, highway, Pennsylvania. Okay, I mean, if you follow the map, if you start from Indiana, you can see the highways that they took. Okay, Pennsylvania. It's a different driver. Again, a gray, nondescript, nothing in it car. I mean, like just empty, clean car. So. Then another bit of weirdness. This is just, which is also so interesting because it just seems that operationally in some aspects of this they were just flying by the seat of their pants. Okay, which was even more there was compounded to panic, right? So the thing was, I remember I'm looking at this guy, and now I'm starting to get unwoozy. Okay, but. Well, I'll get into the state of my mind, okay, because it's really big. As I say, this screwed up my head for 5 years. But the thing was that I start coming around, okay, and I look over at this guy, and he really scared me. It was like, I mean, I hate using, fiery rhetoric, but this looked like SS, true believer, right? I mean, and...
a train killer.
Yeah, right, And so, it's just like, oh, fuck. And so he pulls off the highway, okay? And he pulls into this like sort of hardware gas station, thing. And there's a phone there. And he gets out of the phone booth. And I'm starting to come, and I'm just really thankful that I'm starting to get. So, I mean, I can even start moving my hand, and I can see like, oh, wow, what, what? And so there was a lot of what, I mean, if you don't believe it, believe me, I didn't believe it. Believe me, I didn't believe it. Okay, so I mean, I seriously thought I was losing my mind. Okay, that's definitely part of the thing. Really. So, I mean, you got to understand, at that point, I still didn't believe that the U.S. government would do things to the, that they were good guys. They didn't do things to, I'm an American, I mean, blah, blah, blah. I mean, even if I'm a protester, hippie, they wouldn't do this, I mean, blah, blah, blah. So, anyway, this guy gets out of the car, he goes to the phone, and I see him, he's talking on the phone. And I'm thinking, like, you're asking them what to do with me? You don't know. So I got very frightened. I mean, what happens if they come back and they
able to overhear what he was saying?
No, I just get the feeling. What is he? I mean, and he comes out. And I just, I got terrorized. I mean, well, terror is terror. I mean, I was in a state of total terror at this point, and I just sort of figured from the look that I got on this guy that, like, if they say kill him, boom, and so which can get you really annoyed, like having some being put in that position. Once you get yourself back on your feet. Anyway, so this guy gets in the car, and he takes me out to the highway and dumps me, like a bad movie, boom, on the highway.
Just open the door and kick
open the door, bloop, and I roll over out of the highway, and he's off. Okay, skirting the pebbles back in my face, and bloop, back on the highway, and I'm there. And I was just like, oh man, right? And I remember the sun, and I remember looking at the green of the grass and just thinking it was all beautiful, and then saying like, okay, can I stand? Okay, can I stand? Okay, and I struggled to my feet. Okay, that was not easy to do, but I did stand up. Okay, which I was really happy about. Okay, and I took a deep breath, and then I sort of tried to assess what was happening, and because I couldn't put it together, this didn't match, or anything. All right, so I said to two things came into my mind, just two real clear, instructive, survival mechanisms. Okay, don't tell anyone. Okay, because if you go and tell somebody what just happened, okay, they're going to lock you up in a loony bin. You ain't ever coming out, okay? So find out what happened. See, you can walk, get your head together, because I started trying to think it was impossible. And let me just say the second thing, and then I'll try and explain the headspace, okay? The second thing that came into my mind, which was very good information from my mind to tell me, don't tell anybody. I mean, keep your mouth shut, because that's what it would have happened. I mean, this is crazy business, especially, none of the, this was before, but pre-Watergate, okay, So, anyway, the other thing was get back to New York, okay. I knew I was close to Philadelphia because I saw the highway sign. Get back to New York, get back to the village, get back to the Lower East Side, get below 14th Street in Alphabet City, and see your friends, okay, and get yourself together, okay. So that's what I was doing, okay. Now, aside from total weakness, okay, because, I was really as weak as a kitten, was like I was standing up, and I just had my hand, sort of half hung out, right? Which let me. It wasn't the mind that I had for the next 5 years. Okay. Abstract painting. That's the only way that I can describe it is two ways. It's sort of abstract painting where a platform doesn't have an end and then it ends, and it goes into another geometric shape that just nothing. Everything was sort of liquid, okay. And the only way that I can describe it further is like it was sort of like there was a logical thinking process, okay, that the plot line would drop out of, okay? And it would just be bump. It would be like being in a bumpy elevator, okay, that didn't stop for about 5 years, okay? It was like, so the logical connections, it was just the ability to think, which, it's perfect, if as a counter-interventionist technique, if you want to jail or knock off or put the people who are opposing your power structure, and you want to put them out of commission for a while, boy, whatever drug they gave me, boy, that would do it. So I guess they learned something, but anyway, glad they learned something, but anyway, so the thing was the only other way that I could describe it, because I'll continue with getting off the highway, because there's a bit more that's a bit interesting about that, was to describe the unhappiness and the anguish that this was I was living in the street at that time. I mean, the shape that I was in is some guy that you pass on a corner and is dirty and bedraggled and his clothes are just yuck, and he's mumbling to himself and he's like, he's out of his mind. That was me. Okay? So, don't tell anybody made sense. I mean, because, I was out of my mind. But part of me was very solid. I was trying to get, I was trying to repatch all of this stuff that kept on falling apart, right?
Namely,
so
the reality
my mind,
around you.
yeah, right, or my mind's perception of the reality around me, yeah. So, anyway, there was one night because I was wandering the streets, and I was barefoot, and I had eaten some food out of a garbage can, and I found myself rubbing my hands against the brick wall of a bank until they were bleeding and causing me pain, and that's when I knew to stop because my palms were starting to bleed. And I was saying, "Here, take my blood, but give me back my mind." Okay. Anyway,
so that just must have been a horrifying experience, because at that point you really didn't know what was done to you, whether it was just the drugs or something else, or what combination of drugs and where it was going.
Didn't have a handle on nothing.
And it didn't seem to end.
No. And all my friends left me, and I mean, there was no support mechanism because I had been a very solid person. I mean, I was a person that people looked forward to talking to and gathering around, right? And, I could see them talking, like, what happened to him? And then finally people became disgusted with me. So, I just, it was a nightmare.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, just to get a frame of reference here, what year was this that this happened?
Okay. This was the late 60s, let's say around 69, okay?
Summer of 69.
Yeah, because I came to Canada in the later part of 71. Let me get off the highway, and then we'll get to coming to Canada, okay? Because there's two incidents here, okay? Mm-hmm. It's not only the drugging, but it's the second time I was screwed up.
Yep.
This happened in the Nixon administration. The second time I was screwed up was under Ronald Wilson Reagan, okay?
We'll get into that later.
Yeah, we'll get into that later. Okay, so anyway, I'm on the highway, and it's almost cliche, but I mean, sometimes the life is almost like a cliche. This hippie van stops. I mean, the van is painted, and I mean, these hardcore hippies are in the van, right? And they say, "Hey, get in, man!" And like, and there's this very nice couple who's the most together of the grouping in this van, and they're in the front, and they start talking to me, and I'm just lying in the back, right? And they were so wonderful. I want to thank them again if they even hear this. But the woman looked at me, and then she looked at her boyfriend, and she said, "This guy's in trouble, man. Let's take him home." And so they took me to their they had a house, and they took me to the house, and they gave me a bath, and they gave me some fresh clothes to wear, and gave me something to eat, and I wasn't talking very much, and she said to me, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to New York City." She said, "We'll buy you a bus ticket, man. You're in no shape, okay?" And so they drove me to downtown Philadelphia, and we had a cup of coffee together, and then they bought me this bus ticket, and I went back to New York, which was really quite nice.
Have you seen them since?
No. So anyway, I mean, that was part of what, as I say, there was actually a sense of community being established. Mm-hmm. I went back to New York, and then through 5 years of travail, what happened was there was one friend. He had been politically active with me, and then he had left the States, and he had gone to Montreal, and I don't know. I was trying everything. I mean, it was getting a little better, like at one point I got better enough. Oh God, I was living in a mission, and I got a job as a warehouseman, and so I got some money, right? And like I was really quiet and into myself, just like testing the waters of, and so I went up to Montreal, and I mean everybody who knew me just, it was sort of like, whoa, yeah, oh, lady, they were sort of like, I guess they assumed like I had a bad drug trip, which I had, but I didn't give it to myself. This guy said, well, you should leave the States, man. I mean, at that point, peace, love was no more, and the cities were burning. And the Watts was going on in Detroit and Harlem, and I mean, it was just, and you had the assassinations. I mean, it was just like, whole bunches of stuff. And so, which I no longer was, couldn't keep two things in my head together.
This is still like just a couple of years after.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh no, I was off the chessboard, politically as an activist, unquote. So anyway, he said, well, you should come up to Canada. I said, yeah, okay. He said it's sane up here. I said, okay. So I moved up to Montreal, and then Montreal was going through a great bit of upheaval about French and English, which I didn't know a hell of a lot when I first got, across the border into Montreal. And it was sort of like, oh, what did you invite me up here? What, a political environment? What are you? And he said, no, look, go out to British Columbia, man. There's woods, there's trees, okay? The thing to keep in mind, okay, was later I got solidly back together, okay? Later I was working as a copywriter on a radio station. I had a rented farm situation, and I was back on my feet. Okay, I had chickens, and
out in BC.
Out in BC, right? Okay, I had put in a garden. I mean, it's a healthy environment. You chop wood, you go swimming, you go skinny dipping in the lake and watch a falcon for a while. I mean, it's a good way to
live.
Yeah. So anyway, I was doing that, and so when I got myself back together again,
after spending
5 years of not being so, then I met a woman and fell in love with her, and she had been politically active. I mean, like she was a student activist and had tanks in the streets and had been a medic during some of the riots in Madison, Wisconsin. She had bicycled across the country, and I met her. And anyway, so we got married, okay? And I was with my wife for 2 or 3 years. And I hadn't told anybody, okay? I had put it out of my mind, okay? I had gone back to being a writer. Okay, I hadn't thought about it. I mean, it was just like, forget about it. Okay, and it was a pleasure to forget about it. Okay, and so one night my wife was holding me, and I was shaking and crying and really going through terror again. And I told her about what had happened. And she was really, really very strong. She said, well, Ron, you're a writer, right? I said, yes. She said, write about it. I said, okay. So that was the first writing of what's come to be Transgressions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But no, I up until I started writing about it. Okay, it was just cathartic, and healthy. There was still the basic, robotic instructions I had given myself at the roadside, which was, don't tell anybody; they're just going to think you're nuts, and get yourself together. Okay, so. I guess at the point where I felt strong enough that, okay, knock on wood together, which leads me to all of the research that I've done about MKUltra itself.
Right.
Okay.
So let's talk about that. What after deciding that you were going to write about it, what avenues of did you pursue trying to find out what happened to you?
Okay. I've read all of the Senate hearings works. I've also read, I believe, every book that's been written, and there's been some fine work by different writers on MKUltra. Okay, and given myself all of that background, I also since I'm a fiction writer. That's what I am. I mean, I've had to become a switch hitter, in the sense of having worked for ad agencies and newspapers and trade journals, and I even have my own consulting business as a writer. Perfect Communications is the name of my consulting business. But I know how to do other types of writing. Okay, but I am a fiction writer. Okay, so I thought that the best medium to doing this was to write it as a work of fiction. And the thing was, I didn't think that just a first-person story would really give a full picture of what was going on there. So what I've also done is research Sidney Gottlieb. He had a very nice farm. He used to like to milk goats. And he was, by the way, Sidney Gottlieb, it was a very interesting synchronicity, who was in charge of the CIA's, mind control experiment, a Jew who's from the Bronx, just like me, a Jew from the Bronx, right? I mean, perfect, right? Anyway, I mean, him and I, would have had a fist fight, I believe, after school if I had ever met this son of a bitch. Anyway, the thing was, I shouldn't get back to my Bronx shtick. The thing was, I've also researched all of the people involved, so that, some of the characters in my book, since we'll get into the second half of it, is Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Oliver North, Tom Charles Huston, who was Tom Charles Huston is a fascinating little doohickey, because he was Nixon's young guy, okay, who also came from Indianapolis, right? And the thing is that I've done research on the individuals involved, okay, and so I wrote a work of fiction, okay, which very interestingly, because I really do have a rather large talent, and I say that without an ego. I mean, it's a gift, and I've been blessed with it, okay? Interestingly, this book has had such difficulty in getting published, you see. But because it's the interlock, it's the corporate interlock. I mean, it's just, it goes on forever. But anyway, so, the story that I wrote is fiction, but it's based on the factual data.
So during this time that you were trying to get information about MKUltra and specifically what happened to you, what program that you were involved in, what kind of response were you getting from the government? You were making freedom of information requests. How much information were they giving you? Okay. How much was blacked out? Okay. The interesting thing is I've gone through different administrations. Okay, I mean, gone through the Carter administration. Okay, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, and now Clinton. Okay, so there'd almost be 4 or 5 different answers to that. Okay.
the Carter administration, because but basically nothing happened until Carter came in. Okay, now I don't know if everything that happened during the Carter administration was what using those fellows' terminologies was a limited hangout, but which means, tell them a bunch of phony baloney stuff that'll keep them occupied, and we'll keep the good stuff to ourselves, but I mean, Colby, the guy who just died. I try to stick to the facts. If I don't know it for sure, I'm not going to throw around accusations. He was the head of the CIA at that point. Let's just make something clear, okay, about that, because that's really the egregious lack of. Because my main thrust in all of this, okay, is to achieve two things: truth and justice. Okay, believe me, I have gone through a desire for revenge. Okay, that was hell on earth. Okay, and I believe that, thank God, I have worked out my desire for revenge. Okay, but I don't think it's possible to put this to rest for myself without truth or justice being established. Okay, so during Carter's time and the hearings that went on, I mean, Carter came on and he said, "I'm not going to tell you any lies." You had, and I mean that's what he claimed. Okay, so while he had the largest defense budget, even bigger than Reagan's increase, as far as I understand, but nonetheless, nice cop, bad cop, but anyway, Jimmy's a nice guy. He builds houses for poor people. Right. Okay. So anyway, during that period, there was information being released. Now, I sent off a lot of freedom of information requests. There's basic strategy that I work having now. I mean, I write a great freedom of information request letter, but I've done it often enough. But the first of all, you get denied. Okay, then you go through that whole thing. I mean, the basic thing that the game they sort of operate on is like, you want something, tell me where it is, and I'll go look for it. And so it's sort of like which. In a way, I shouldn't. I mean, if you're gonna, because there's been some very helpful, good people in the libraries, in the government as well. Okay, I mean, there's all sorts of folk who work for government, and there's been people who've really tried to help me. The thing is, they're working with a big. I mean, there were lots of covert activities and lots of documentation. So even if you want to get stuff for somebody, to some degree, you got to know. What are you talking about, and what do you want me to look for? Okay, so stuff that came out during that period was, first, the most reassuring thing that came out during the Carter administration. That I mean, without me going to the files and dragging all that stuff out, is that oh, thank God. Okay, I'm not nuts. Okay.
And you're not alone.
I'm not alone. This really happened. That really, I mean, like, okay.
You've been listening to an interview with Ronald Howard Cohen about his abduction and severe drugging by the CIA and military as part of the mind control experimentation. Stay tuned next week for part 2 of this interview on CKLN, the International Connection 88.1.